Hi, this is George from the Return of the King. In this video I want to look at the date of June 24th through the 26th, which I believe is the true Feast of Unleavened Bread. We can thank Dr. Barry Ah. I think he has cracked the calendar code and figured out how the calendars should work. He has a video out that he just put out yesterday. It's called Rapture Confirmation Notes for tonight's live. I highly recommend you watch this video. I'll have a link to it in the description box. But what I want to do next is I want to kind of go and show you how the calendar worked, and I think he discovered the correct way to calculate out the dates. Now this is Torah calendar, and what they did this year was they set March 14th and 15th as the first day of the year. You can see the one up here. The problem is the spring equinox is on the 6th, so I'm not sure why they did this, but it's supposed to be, from the things that I've read, it should always occur after the equinox. I'm sure they have good reasons, but again, like what I've said, it should occur after the equinox. So the true date then should be April 13th and 14th should be the very first day of the year. And that's what we see in the calendar here. So the first day of the year would be sunset April 13th to sunset on April 14th. And then your Sabbaths would be, you would count 7 days, because biblically that's what it says to do. You count 7 days. So your Sabbaths every month would be the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, and then the 28th. And so the most important date to get right is this date here. It's the Passover. And in the Bible, it's going to tell you it's always the 14th day of the first month, because Jesus, in order to fulfill all the typology, this is something the rabbis of the day, when Jesus walked the earth, they had to get this right. And this is the easiest one to get right, because it's always the 14th day after the sighting of the crescent moon. And so if they get that right, Jesus dies on the right day and he fulfills Passover. So they can basically mess up the rest of the days. And for example, that would be like what we see up here. This is in Torah calendar. This is something that has always bothered me. There's no way in the world you can know the correct Sabbath day as relative to the creation of the earth. You'd have to go, somebody would have had to have been keeping track of everything from the very first day of creation until the seventh day of creation, then kept track of that to know what day relative to the stars and everything, how that all works and everything. So this makes the most sense to me, because you can go into captivity, you can come out, and you can go out and you can sight the moon after the equinox. That's going to be your first day, and then like all these calculations, they all just fall in place. It's always the 7 days after. It's the 14th, 21st, and the 28th. And so what happens here with the Feast of Weeks, if we go to Leviticus 23:15, and you shall number to you from the next day after the Sabbath, from the day you bring the sheave of the wave offering, they shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. And so what happens here, the unleavened bread goes from the 15th to the 21st right here. And so what Dr. Barry has done, he begins the count here, which makes sense. So it's after it would be the next Sabbath after the end of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which ends here. So we're going to start the count here on this day here, the 28th, which is May 10th to 11th. So that was our first Sabbath. And then you sight the moon here. So this is your first day. And so your next Sabbath is here on the 7th, the 14th, the 20th, and 28th. So you count. So this is 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we go to the next month, which will be June here. You have your 7 days is to here, and then you have your 7th day here. So that would be June 24th, from sunset on June 24th to sunset on June 25th. And that would be then the 7th Sabbath, and then you have the following day as the 25th. Next, I want to talk about the Passover. The Passover is a type of the rapture, and Egypt is a type of the world. Now, the moon is always full on the 14th, 15th, 16th day of the month. And at midnight, the moon, it's a brilliant white, and the moon represents the church. I'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. When we get raptured, in the twinkling of an eye, we're going to change from whatever it is we're wearing, and we're going to be clothed in white robes, just like you see everyone in the book of Revelation is clothed in white. In a Jewish wedding, the groom comes at midnight, and he comes and he steals his bride away. And so when we look at the Exodus, we see here in Exodus 12:5, it says, "Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You can take it from the sheep or the goats. You keep it until the 14th day of the month, and then at twilight you kill the lambs." And then when they eat the Passover meal, It says, in this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It's the Lord's Passover, and that's because right after midnight, they're going to have to leave in the middle of the night. And then in Exodus 12:12, it says, for I will pass, this is the Lord now, I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And then what happens? At midnight, the Lord, it's the Lord himself, struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And then what happens is Pharaoh rises up in the middle of the night. They hear all the crying and wailing because of all the death. And what do? They go and he goes and summons Moses and Aaron by night. He wants them out of there right now. It's like, get out of here now. Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go serve the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and herds, and be gone. And this is blessing, which is kind of unusual. So what we see here, we see the typology again of the rapture of the church, because Egypt is a type of the world, and it's the Lord himself comes down and strikes down the firstborn of Egypt, and then the Israelites are going to be set free. They're going to be leaving Egypt in the middle of the night. And again, when the Lord comes for us, if you look at a Jewish wedding, the groom comes at midnight with trumpet and fanfare and blowing the shofar, and then they come and he takes his bride. And that's what we see in the Exodus. We see a type of the rapture here. Next, I want to look at the heavens. I just want to kind of go over, do a little review here. For people who haven't watched my videos, understand that that God put the story of redemption in the heavens. The New Testament opens with the virgin birth of Jesus Christ, and it ends in the book of Revelation with Jesus returning as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Now, the civil Jewish year begins on Rosh Hashanah in the fall with the sun in the constellation of Virgo, and then all the sun, the moon, and the planets, they all travel in this direction. And then the sun ends the year in the constellation of Leo, and Jesus is in the line of the tribe of Judah. Then we have the constellations of Pisces, Aries, and Cetus. These are all talking about the pre-tribulation rapture of the church. They appear before the last four constellations. And this here we have Taurus, Christ, the judge. This is the start of the tribulation here. The rapture occurs before. This represents the church who's restraining the serpent in the sea. And when the church gets raptured out, then he is released. We'll talk about that a little bit more. We have the heavenly wedding, and then we have Cancer, and then we have Leo, the lion. We have Leo, who is Jesus, the lion of the tribe of Judah. If we look at ancient Jewish synagogues, you will find the zodiac, or what they call the Mazzaroth, tiled into the floors. Each tribe was associated with one of the 12 constellations. For example, the tribe of Judah is associated with the constellation Leo, and then we see that Jesus is the lion of the tribe of Judah, and you can see the lion here, and you can see Leo here, and you can see this is Betula or Virgo here. You can see Cancer is here, and you can see like Gemini, the twins are here. And now everything that the descriptions of the constellations, 98% of what I show you comes from this book written by Joseph A. Zeiss. He is a Lutheran theologian and minister. He wrote this book back in the 1800s, and he's kind of my source for all the understanding and descriptions of the constellations and what they mean from a biblical standpoint. Okay, we're looking at the heavens on June 6th, at the 6th hour, 6th minute, and 6th second from Jerusalem. And at that moment in time, the moon, which is a waning moon, in other words, it's growing darker, is leaving the constellation of Pisces, and it's heading into the constellation of Aries. I think that's kind of interesting what's happening, because when the church leaves, the band is loosed, and Satan is going to be loosed on earth. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the constellations here. And so like Pisces, the early Christians were called Pisces and Ichthus, and you can see the symbol of the fish you find. And back in if you're like me, if you're during the 60s and 70s, I had a belt buckle that had the fish on it, and it was a popular symbol of Christians and Christianity. And then I want to talk next about the serpent in the sea, and this comes from Joseph Zeiss in his book. This is the dragon, soon to be loosed. Of old Isaiah prophesied of a day when the Lord with his sower and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, that piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. And he's going to slay that dragon at the end of the tribulation. He's going to use him for his purposes during the tribulation. And here we'll talk about the bands, and what is especially remarkable in the case is that the double end band, which upholds the fishes after passing the front foot or hand of the lamb, is fastened on the neck of this monster and holds him firmly bound. The name of the first of the seed of stars, Menkar, refers to this, for Menkar means the chained enemy. And so the name of the second star, Diphtha, means the overthrown, the thrust down. So again, here we see the serpent in the sea, and we see the Bible describing this particular creature. And then if we go to 2 Thessalonians, it talks about the restrainer. It says, "Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? And you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed in his time, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way." And that's the church. That's what most of us believe. "And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved." So next we want to look at Aries. Aries has to do with the rapture of the church. It's our blessed hope. The concept of the first and last trump that the Apostle Paul speaks of comes from the ram that Abraham sacrificed in place of Isaac. The ram is a type of Christ. If you remember, the ram was caught in the thicket by its horns. The left horn, called the first trump, is associated with the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. The right horn, called the last trump, is associated with the resurrection of the dead and the rapture of the church. And Paul says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpets shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall all be changed." Now, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's a harvest feast. Christ was the first fruits, and we're the full harvest, which will occur at the rapture. Next, I want to talk about the moon representing the church, and this is again from Joseph Zeiss, and it comes from Joseph's dream. He says in Genesis 37:9 through 10, "Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, 'Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars are bowing down to me.' But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, 'What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?'" And then in the symbology of the scriptures, the moon sometimes denotes the mother of the family, as in Joseph's dream. Both the woman and the moon are representatives of the church. As the woman was made out of the side of Adam when he slept, so the church was made out of Christ by means of that deep sleep of death which came upon him, and to which he submitted for the purpose. The whole mystery of marriage is a symbol of the union between Christ and his church. Everywhere the congregation of believers is pictured as the spouse of Christ, the spiritual woman, the mother of us all. Again, this is from Joseph Zeiss. And then we have Taurus. Taurus represents Christ, the judge, coming during the tribulation. I'll go into a little more detail on that. We have Auriga, not exactly sure how to pronounce that, Christ protecting his flock. And then we have Gemini, which is the wedding between Christ and his bride, the church. And then Cancer is a resting place of the saints. And then we have Leo, which represents Jesus, the lion of the tribe of Judah. And then all the moon, the sun, and the planets, they all travel in this direction. And it's interesting because in Hebrew, we read, like in America, we read from left to right, and Hebrew is written in the opposite direction. It's read and it's written from right to left. And so when we look at the stars and the constellations from Jerusalem looking to the south. That is the direction that the story is being told. Next, I want to talk about when the moon is in the constellation of Aries, that being the sign of the soon rapture of the church. Now, it's interesting because when the moon was leaving the constellation of Pisces, that occurred on June 6th at the 6th hour. It's interesting that when the moon is now in the constellation of Aries, it's on the 7th of June, and I set this to the 7th hour, 7th minute, and 7 seconds. Before we had 666, and now we have 777, perfection and completion. It's just kind of interesting. I just want to talk a little bit about how the whole idea came about, because it came about from a dream I had back in the fall. I was running this race in Egypt with a friend called Steve. We're running through all the sites in Egypt, the pyramids and other sites of antiquity. And we're getting close to the end of the race, about 5-6 miles left. And I decided it's time to kick it up and head on, move on out. And I discover my sport watch isn't working. I can't, it communicates with my phone. I don't know where I am. I have no map. I have no nothing, no heart rate, no anything. And so I just kind of book off and I just follow other people. I end up getting lost in the city. And so then I go find a map. And this is what the map looked like. It was drawn just like this. And then it had this weird V in it. And it says, you are here. And then after that point, I woke up. And so the question then was, we're looking at this. This is equivalent to the Christ angle. But what happens is other people noticed something here. This looked very similar to the V in Pisces. And so if you overlay the map that I had in the dream and you overlay it on Pisces and the constellation Aries, you see a very strong similarity here. And it's kind of like here this is, boom, and here's the church and the rapture. So what happened then that night, what happened is I started actually looking into Joseph Zeiss's book, and at the time I had forgotten that Aries was the rapture of the church, would represent the rapture of the church. So I saw that, and then the whole thing with Pisces and the restraining of the serpent and everything. So this all just kind of came together, and then I read about where the moon could represent the church. He described that. So then I just asked Lord, so I was thinking, well, so when the moon is in Aries, which represents the church, could that be a sign of the soon rapture of the church, maybe on that day or a day in the very near future? And so that night I asked the Lord about that. Could this be a sign? And that night then I had a dream. It was a dream where I was at this big party, and there was all these people that I knew who they were, but I didn't know them. But it was like we knew each other very intimately. And at first I didn't know what the party was. Eventually I find out, well, this party's a wedding. Then I find out the wedding, it's my wedding. I'm getting married in this wedding. And I married a woman who I know who she is, but I've never met her. And then her name is Taya. And then I wake up from the dream. And I immediately know that her name has got to have some kind of meaning. And so I go look up the name Taya, and Taya means divine. So what was all going on here? This was a heavenly wedding. This was our wedding in heaven. And that's why I knew all the people. And there was just the fruit of the Spirit was just there. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. I mean, it was just manifest there. It was the most amazing thing ever. And so that was a confirmation then to me that when we see the moon in the constellation of Aries, that there's something going on here. Now, I mean, the negative to that is the moon is in Aries every single month. So there has to be something different. And there's something very, very different, which we're going to talk about here, about the month of May and June, and I'm going to discuss that here in this next slide. Okay, this is what we see in the heavens on June 7th. We just looked at June 6th, that's 666. The moon here is just leaving the band of Pisces. When the moon moves into the constellation of Aries, which represents the rapture of the church, it's 67777. 7 is the number of completion, so I think that's just kind of some interesting things going on the Gregorian calendar there. Now, what's important about the moon here, this moon is it's a waning moon. It's getting darker day by day. And so as the moon, which represents the church, heads into the constellation of Taurus, which is the coming tribulation, the church isn't present. And so the typology here is perfect for this time of year. Like I say, it's only in May and June that this occurs, that the moon is disappearing as it heads into Taurus. And that's because of the location of the sun, which is right here between the horns. So as the moon moves into Taurus, it disappears, and the church is not here. It's a pre-tribulation rapture. We are not here during the 7-year tribulation. It takes the moon exactly 7 days to move from Aries to Cancer, and Cancer represents the resting place of the saints, represents heaven, and the tribulation lasts 7 years, and we'll be in heaven for those 7 years. And you see the typology here too. So the typology of the rapture being in the month of June and the sign being in June is absolutely perfect here. We read in the book of Isaiah here, it says, your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy. For your dew is a dew of light, and the earth will give birth to the dead. Come, my people, enter into your chambers and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until the fury has passed by. For behold, the Lord is coming out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. And the earth will disclose the blood shed on it, and it will no longer cover its slain. In that day the Lord with his great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon in the sea. So all the imagery that we see here in Isaiah is all represented in the heavens here. We can see the dragon in the sea, that at the end of the tribulation, he's going to slay that dragon. He's going to use that dragon to bring for his purposes during the tribulation. Come, my people, enter your chambers, shut, hide yourselves for a little while. The moon becomes hidden. It becomes hidden from view. The moon represents the church. It's not here during the tribulation. So all the typology here for the month of June is absolutely perfect. And that's what we also see when we'll look at the other half of the sky later in the constellation of Sagittarius. So if you look here now, this is just, we moved one day forward. This is now on the 8th. You can see the moon here, and there's just barely any sliver here. You probably can't see it here. Again, judgment is not poured out on the church. We're gone, and then 7 days later, the moon is in the constellation of Cancer, 7-year tribulation. So we're just not here. And that's a good thing. Okay, this is June 10th, and what we see here is we're looking at the total solar eclipse that occurs between the horns of Taurus, and Taurus represents Christ, the judge who's coming to judge the world. Solar eclipses, they represent judgment coming to the world, whereas lunar eclipses represent judgment coming upon the nation of Israel. And so this is a perfect typology going here, that Christ, who is very, very shortly, this fall is when I believe that's going to occur, the tribulation is going to start, that he is going to be pouring out his judgment upon the world. And that's what we're seeing here. We see Venus, which represents Jesus, the bright morning star. That's from the book of Revelation. He calls himself the bright morning star. We see it in the constellation of Gemini, which represents the wedding between Christ and his bride. So there's imagery here of Christ coming to get his bride before the tribulation starts, which is we hope is going to happen here on the 24th through the 26th of June. Mars is going to move in the constellation of Cancer, which will be important. I'll talk about that later. And then also Mercury here is going to be on the horns of Taurus on the 25th. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. That's also some important typology is going to show up with that. And now I want to take a look at the eclipses that have occurred over the last couple of years, but specifically these 3 that have occurred within the last 6-7 months here. And if we look at the eclipses, we see that we have 2 solar eclipses and we have 1 lunar eclipse. So we had on the 14th, we had a solar and a solar, and then we had the total lunar eclipse. This is interesting because it occurred on the 2nd month, on the 13th day. Pope Francis, they went through a lot of trouble to put him on power on 3/13/2013, because 13 is a big occultic number. Now, two of the 3 eclipses occurred in the constellation of Scorpio. Scorpio has to do with the coming of the Antichrist. The Antichrist is believed to come from the tribe of Dan. The constellation of Dan is the Scorpion or Scorpio. And then in iPet Goat 2, they show the Antichrist coming out, and you see in the clouds, you see a scorpion when the Antichrist is being birthed and when he is like coming to power. I'll show you that a little bit later. And then we have the solar eclipse between the horns of Taurus, Christ, the judge coming. So this is a perfect typology, especially if we look into the book of Joel 2:31. It says, the sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And that's exactly what we see here in the heavens. We see not only do we see like the sun turning the darkness, the moon to blood, but we're seeing them in constellations that have meaning relative to the coming of the Antichrist and to Christ coming to judge the world during the 7-year tribulation. In the book of Revelation, 4 times Jesus calls himself the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the ending. In the Hebrew language, the Alpha and the Omega is the Aleph and the Tav. And so what exactly is the Aleph and the Tav? Well, the elf is an ox, a strong leader. And what do we see in the constellation of Taurus? We see it's an ox, and it's the most biggest, powerful ox that has ever existed. It's called the reem. This ox was the size of an elephant, and it existed in the area of Palestine. It was eventually hunted into extinction, and it no longer exists. But that's what we see in the heavens. So when we see in the constellation Taurus, we see the most powerful ox that has ever existed on the planet of the earth, and that ox is Christ, who's coming to judge the world. And then in Job, and this is where it talks about the wild ox, the reem, it says, will the wild ox consent to be your servant or spend the night by your feed trough? Can you tie the wild ox in the furrow with his rope, or will he harrow the valley for you? Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave your labor to him? Now this is the interesting verse here, is this one here. Or will you have faith in him that he will return your seed and gather it to your grain floor? Now during the tribulation, he's going to gather Israel back to himself during the tribulation. And it says your grain floor is like your threshing floor. It's where the grain is threshed. And being threshed and broken is not, separating the wheat from the chaff. That's not a pleasant experience. And Israel is not going to go through a very pleasant experience, and only a remnant of Israel is going to be saved, and they're going to turn to the Lord and realize that Jesus Christ is the King. They will weep for him. How does the saying go? They will mourn for him whom they have pierced. And so in the ox here, we see Christ, who is a strong leader. He's going to take back his kingdom on earth. He's going to judge the world, and he's going to fulfill his promise to the Jews that they will worship him as their Lord and Savior. And so what is the Tav? The Tav was basically two sticks laid on the ground in the form of a cross. And Jesus said, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And the Alpha and the Tav. And this is very, very cool, the center point for all human history from God's perspective. Without the cross, there's no salvation for mankind. And so how cool is that? So next, what I want to do is I want to look at, here's some photos of the eclipse. This is a photo of the eclipse, and this is the dome in Washington, D.C. of the Capitol. If we go to the movie, the video I Pet Goat 2, there's a scene right before the Antichrist's birth. It looks like this, and you've got this character here. I think some think it's Osama bin Laden. He's got a CIA badge on. He's got all these bombs, like getting ready to go to war. And what do you see? You see a crescent moon that is pretty much identical to what you see in Washington, D.C. Here's another photo of the eclipse. What does that remind you of? It's the devil who is coming to the earth, the horns of the devil. Okay, what we're looking at here is we're looking at the Vatican in Washington, D.C., and you're going to see the structures of the Vatican in Washington, D.C. are set up very similar. You have an obelisk and a dome building, an obelisk and another dome building, and these structures are designed to empower, for example, Pope Francis, and then this here is set up to empower the coming Antichrist. And what I want to talk about is a dream I have that's connected to the obelisks. And in this particular dream, I was involved in a very epic battle, and what I did is I found 3 arrows, and in the arrowheads, the tips of the arrowheads looked like this, and they had writing upon them. They had very simple symbols, and they were in all the colors of the 4 horsemen except the white color was missing. 2 of the 3 arrowheads were identical, and 1 was different. The colors were the same, but the order and stuff was different, and they were on all sides. And so when you look at these, what does it remind you of? Well, the arrowheads, they represent the obelisks that you see in Washington, and then the obelisks that you see in Luxor, Egypt. The obelisks are involved in incarnating, a demonic spirit into either the Pharaoh or into Antichrist. And in Egypt, the Pharaoh, after they would perform, they would go to Luxor, Egypt, they perform a ceremony, and he would come out as God, and he would come back as he would be the god Horus, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Again, we have the Vatican and Washington. They're set up to do this exact thing here, to take a demonic spirit, or probably Satan himself, and put it into the Antichrist. And then back in November. This is when we had the dreams. My son had 3 dreams on one night, and I had 2, all involving the rapture and these symbols here. He had a dream, almost like a flash vision of an 8 and then an 888, and 8 means new beginnings. And the gematria of Jesus in Greek is 888. And then that same night, I had a dream. I was in this safari park, Disney Safari Park, and there was like rapture signs all over the place. And then I had the dream of the 3 arrowheads, which are tied to the obelisks, and they're tied to the eclipses, because that's what the meaning of the dream is. Now I understand them. 2 of the 3 arrowheads were identical, and so when we look at the eclipses, 2 of them occurred in the constellation of Scorpio, and 1 occurred in the constellation of Taurus, and then again 2 were solar and 1 lunar. So you can see the similarity here. 2 are the same and 1 is different. And so basically my interpretation of the dream is that after these 3 eclipses occur, then the rapture occurs. The dreams are not specific to the date, but they're going to occur then sometime after the 10th, and everything is pointing to this period of time of June 24th to the 25th. And then I want to show you here the shot from iPet Goat 2, where we see that the total solar eclipse occurs in the Scorpio, Scorpio, and then the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse, they occur in the constellation of Scorpio. And when we go to iPet Goat 2, this here is the Antichrist. He's just been birthed here. You can see in the clouds, here's the tail of the scorpion. And this is in the morning, the sun is rising. It's the dawning of a new era, the age of Aquarius. Now we're back to the eclipse, and I want to talk a little bit more about the video iPet Goat 2. Now in the video iPet Goat 2, there's an apple. It rolls across this Masonic floor, the black and white tiles, and then it passes an L, and there's a C, and then it stops here and it splits in 2, and then the 2 seeds intertwine and they form the lotus flower. And the lotus flower has to do with resurrection, it has to do with the bringing life of the Antichrist. And so when you look in the constellations here, you see this is an L, a C, and then the apple, which splits in 2. We have Leo is the L, Cancer represents the C, and then when the lotus, or when the apple splits in 2, that represents the 2 characters of Gemini. And in this part of what they're presenting here in iPet Goat 2 is 1 half of the apple represents Isis, and the other half of the apple represents Osiris. And then you see the 2 seeds coming together. It's like the sperm and the egg, and they birth from Isis and Osiris comes Horus. And now Horus, he goes and he kills Seth, and when he's battling Seth, he loses 1 eye. And so when you see Obama up here winking his eye, and I'll show you all these celebrities where they cover 1 eye, that's called the Eye of Horus. And so again, we have the L, the C, and then we have the apple. You see Leo, Cancer, you see the apple. And then we have Obama here, and he's standing on a coin. And on the coin, there's a crown, so he is supposed to be like a king or a leader. And then on his cheek, you see he has the eclipse, and then he has like this little mole here, which represents Venus. So you see all of these here, they're all in order. You got the Lion, the Cancer, Gemini, and then you've got the eclipse here, which is attached to Obama. And so this is all pointing to the coming of the Antichrist. I don't think I think what happened on this particular day of the eclipse, they performed some type of rituals that are to bring the Antichrist into power. We won't see the Antichrist because we'll be raptured out. He's going to come on the scene sometime in the future here, probably in the next couple months before the fall. And so, there's more to this yet. If we go to the very opening scene of iPet Goat 2 here, you're going to see there's this character here. He's got a gun and he's got a dog, and then this here represents the eclipse. And this is like the obelisk in Washington D.C. This is a phallus symbol here, and like this eclipse this is the moon, and this is like the lightning around here is the eclipse, and this represents the eclipse. And then what you're going to see there's 2 dogs here. There's a dog here and a dog here. And then this character here I'll show you is represented by Hydra, which represents Satan. And it's interesting here because you've got Mars, kind of projected here, and then you also have between these 2, you kind of have the eclipse here. And so what happens is this eclipse has to do with the birthing of the Antichrist. And lo and behold, what happens, you're going to see the goat comes out, he's got the number 666 on his head. And so this eclipse is being connected to the arrival of the Antichrist. So when the Antichrist is put in power, comes to power, when you look at it from the perspective of the Freemasons, he's going to represent Horus, who's the god of the sky and war. And Mars, it's interesting here because if we look at you've got the handler here of the dog with the gun. The gun I think symbolizes war. And then you have the antichrist here. So if you look here, you've got the snake here, and you've got the dog here, and then you have war and horse again, like he's the god of sky and war. And then who is in charge of the whole operation here? They show you who the puppet master is, and the puppet master is actually Satan himself, is actually running the whole operation. And you can see that imagery here because you have the snake and you have the dog, just like this here. You have the the guy here, and this is really the snake and the dog. And there, again, it's Satan. He's the one behind the scenes running the whole operation. And then here's just a little bit about Horus. Horus is the Egyptian god of war and the sky. And then it talks a little bit about Horus, goes through some history here. Horus the Younger was Osiris's and Isis's son. He defeated Set, his uncle, and then he restores order to Egypt. One of the mottos of the Freemasons is what they're going to do is they're going to make order out of chaos. They're going to bring chaos on the planet Earth first, and then out of that they'll bring a new world order. And then also, he's the Egyptian god of war and the sky. In Ephesians 2:2, it says, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. And so in Ephesians 2:2, we see that Satan is called the prince of the power of the air. And what is Horus? He's the Egyptian god of war and of the sky. And then this here is a photo montage of a bunch of celebrities. You can see this all over the place. They do the Eye of Horus. A lot of these people have sold their soul to the devil, especially people like Madonna. They're just blatant about it, and so is Lady Gaga. And some of the other ones, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if they're just doing it because everyone else does it. But there's plenty of these people out here that know exactly what they're doing. And one of those celebrities is Kate Perry. She has a video out. It's called Dark Horse. You can see here's the Eye of Horus. The whole video is about it's about Horus, and what it is, it's a play on words here in the video, because Horus is a really evil, and she's kind of an evil character in this. She does some mean things to people in here, and so it's a play on words. It's Dark Horse, but it's really Dark Horus, and she actually becomes Horus in the video. She takes on wings here, and she's standing on top of a pyramid, and here you can see here's Horus, and here's another depiction of Horus. He's got a sword. He's standing on top of a pyramid, and he's going to make war. He's the god of the sky and war. What we're looking at here, we're looking at the heavens on 6/24 at 1 minute to midnight. So a minute before the 25th begins, and what we see here, we've got our full moon in the constellation of Sagittarius. We've got Saturn in the constellation of Capricorn, which is the atonement. There are two goats. One represents Messiah, one represents Satan. We see Jupiter, which represents Christ. It's a striped planet with a wound. That's in the constellation of Christ, which is Christ the water bearer. And then we have this eagle up here, which also represents Christ. This comes from Joseph Zeiss. And this is what he has to say about the eagle here. The eagle is one of the biblical symbols of Christ. Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. And then he goes on to say, and here is the noble eagle, the promised seed of the woman, pierced, torn, and bleeding, that those begotten in his image may be saved from death, sheltered, protected, and made to live forever. And here's the verse from Exodus, and in Exodus 19:3, and Moses went up to God, and Jehovah called him from the mountain, saying, you shall say this to the house of Jacob, and tell it to the sons of Israel. You have seen what I did to Egypt, and I bore you on wings of eagles and brought you to me. So there's a type of the rapture going on here. God bears them on eagle's wings, and he brings them to him. And we have, in this particular section of the sky, we see the eagle, which represents Christ. And now what I want to talk about next here is I want to talk about Sagittarius and the rider on the white horse being Christ. I used to believe for most of my life, I always thought this was Satan. But when you look at the constellation here, you've got The rider on the white horse, he's got a bow, and he's shooting at the scorpion. And Satan is not going to be taking out Satan. Whenever you see white in the Bible, if you just do a word search on white, it always has to, in a case like this, it always has to do with holiness. We will be, we will have white robes, whatever we're wearing. When we get raptured, we're going to have, on the way up at some point, we're going to be changed like in the twinkling of an eye, poof. We're going to have white robes on, and just like all the saints in heaven, they're all wearing white robes. And so just a little bit more here on the rider on the right horse. If you go through and you read through about the four horsemen here, you'll see in Revelation 6:2, I looked and behold a white horse. Its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Christ is the only one who can conquer. Satan can only do what he is allowed to do. And so it's Christ who's doing that. He's taking his kingdom back. So it all makes sense that the white horse is Christ. And then if you look at some of the other horses here, you say, out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. And so this particular rider, it could be an angelic being on the good side, or it could be a demonic being on the other side, because its rider was given. We know Satan is going to be used to bring about God's will and his justice. And then it's interesting, when you have the black horse, there's nothing. Black horse has to do with inflation. So the black horse may just be caused by our human behavior here on earth. And we can see the inflation coming already. Last month we had, I think it was just something over 4%, 4.2, and then this month we had 6.6% inflation. So you can already see the black horse is on its way. And then if you look at the pale horse, this is interesting too. And its rider was named Death, and Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a fourth of the earth. So it's not just a particular individual or spiritual being. There's multiple beings here that are giving authority over the earth to kill with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. And then we also see in Luke 22:31 here, Jesus foretells Peter to now, and the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan asked for you to sift you as wheat. So Satan has to go to God before he can do anything. So that's why this particular, this is why, 99.9% sure this is Jesus. This is not, the rider on the white horse is not Satan. And then what I want to do next, I want to talk about in the constellation Capricorn, because we have this goat-headed creature here with a fish tail. And according to Joseph's Isis, this is due with the Day of Atonement. And what's interesting, on the Day of Atonement, there are two goats. One goat is representative of the Messiah, and one goat is representative of Satan. And I'll just show you that really quickly here. Rather than the traditional scapegoat translating to Azazel here, we should read instead to Azazel. We know that Zazel should be the proper name of a party capable of ownership, because a lot ceremony designated one goat Yahweh belonging to Yahweh, and the other goat as Lazazel belonging to Azazel. However, we do not know what the name Azazel means, but then they go on here. It says, the fact that Yahweh, owner of the goat slain as a purification offering, is supernatural, suggests that Azazel, owner of the live goat, is also some kind of supernatural being, because transporting a load of toxic Israelite toxic waste, Israelite toxic waste consisting of moral faults to Azazel in the wilderness and abandoning it there by the command of Yahweh is a singular unfriendly gesture. It appears that Azazel is Yahweh's enemy. And so, therefore, Azazel is mostly some type of demon, and that's what Jewish tradition records, who dwells in an uninhabited region. And so what we're seeing here is this goat here represents Satan, and it's in the constellation. If you know anything about Satanism, they have Baphomet, and that's a goat head. And so this is all consistent here. And then what's really interesting here, we have Jupiter, which is Jesus. It's a straight planet with the wood, and it's in the constellation of Aquarius, the water bearer. So everything here is in a place that makes sense for the coming rapture of the church. I want to talk a little bit about the planet Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is a striped planet. It has a wound. It's got the big right spot here. In Isaiah 53, it says that he was wounded for our transgressions, and by his stripes we are healed. And so you see that imagery of Jupiter, representing Christ. And then, and this is a little bit more on Jupiter too, and it says, around the throne room, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures. That's Revelation 4:6. And so when Jupiter represents Christ, and when he's sitting on the throne, he is surrounded by 4 living creatures. And what's interesting, There are 4 very large moons that surround Jupiter. They are the Galilean moons. They are named after their discoverer, who was Galileo. And then again, Jesus was what? He was a Galilean Jew. He came from the town of Nazareth in Galilee. So this is just to show you that God is in control of everything. He's even in control of who names the moons. We saw this imagery of heaven here. Now Jupiter has over 75 smaller moons that circle the planet. And then and what that is, this is what we're seeing here. It says, I heard around the throne the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice. And so these other moons, which are much, much smaller, that also orbit the planet Jupiter, they represent these myriads of thousands of angels and other type of beings, including us. And then when we get raptured, where do we go? Well, Revelation 12:5 tells us, it says, she gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up, and that word is harpazo, which means raptured, up to God and his throne. So that's where we go. When we get raptured, we get taken up to the throne room. And that's what we see here. We see an image of the throne room in the constellation of Aquarius. And this is basically God's handwriting in the heavens. Now in Revelation 21:6, that's an interesting number. 6 is June. This is the 21st year. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega. In Hebrew, the Alph and the Tav, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. And what do we see here in the constellation of Aquarius, which represents Christ, the water bearer? We see Jupiter, the straight planet, which is Christ. And we also know about the moons, he's sitting up on his throne. And basically here he says, to the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. So basically what he's telling you here is you have to do nothing except believe. The Tav is the cross. He paid the price by dying on the cross. The work was finished on the cross. There is nothing more that you can do to earn salvation. So everything that we see in this section of the heavens here, we got the moon in Sagittarius. He's pointing, he's going to take out the work of Satan the devil. We've got the eagle here. We saw how in Egypt, God told him, I took you out on the wings of eagles during the Exodus. And then we have Saturn, which represents Satan in the constellation of, with the goat head. And then we have Jupiter, which is Christ in the constellation of Aquarius, the water bearer. Like I say, everything on here makes absolutely perfect sense for a rapture on this day. The moon stays in Sagittarius for 2 to 3 days. So we've got, the 24th, 25th, and 26th. The moon's just going to move over into here. So everything looks perfect on this side of the heavens for the rapture of the church. Now, if we go back to the other side of the heavens, the exact same time, this is at 1 minute to midnight on 6/24, we see that the sun is in the constellation of Gemini, which represents the wedding between Christ and his bride. And Jesus said in John 14:2, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. Now, in a Jewish wedding, the bride and groom, they get betrothed to one another. They have a legally binding contract, but they don't consummate the marriage. What happens is the groom goes to the father's house and he builds an addition onto the house. And that's what Jesus is talking about here in John 14:2. He says, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go and prepare a place for you. So he's the groom. He's going to prepare a place for us. And it's the Father then who approves the addition. And then the groom can come and get his bride. And so that's what we're seeing there. The planet Venus, which represents Christ, the bright morning star from the book of Revelation, has been in the constellation of the wedding and is leaving now. So it's just leaving. So it's like he's leaving the Father's house and he's heading to heaven, and he's going to go and get us. And he's going to take us to heaven because he's left this constellation here. So then let's zoom in on this a little bit here. Now this is interesting too, because Mercury, which typically represents a messenger or an angel, is right on one of the horns formed by the constellation, not by the artwork. The horn goes from here to here, and this horn goes from here to here in the horns of Taurus. And what do we read in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 to 18? It says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, It's kind of like when the Lord came down. It was the Lord himself who came down in Egypt and rescued the Israelites from the hand of Pharaoh and out of Egypt. It says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel. And so we see here, we see an angel or an archangel here in the constellation of the coming judge on one of the horns, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And Aries and the ram, they always blow the shofar, but when it's going to be the actual trumpet of God. And what's interesting, because the archangel is laying on one of the horns here, so there's some kind of imagery and symbolism kind of pointing to this whole verse that we see in 1 Thessalonians about the Lord descending from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and then with the sound of the trumpet of God. And then the dead in Christ will rise first. And then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Now, over here we've got Mars, which represents war. Also the red dragon, Satan, is in the constellation of Cancer, which represents heaven. And in Revelation 12, 7 through 10, we read, now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And you've heard the saying that when we go up, when we get raptured, we go up, they come down. And that's basically what we're seeing here. We see that the red dragon, Satan, is in heaven, and when we go up, he is going to come down. This watch day of that starts on basically 6/24, June 24th through the 26th, is by far the highest watch day of any of the watch days that I've seen so far. I have a hard time believing there's another day that's going to have more things converging. It really should come on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because when you look, there are three feast days where all the males are required to go up to Jerusalem. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread, everything is correct here. The heavens are correct. The rapture should occur in the spring, because the fall is about the coming tribulation. So I think basically we just sit here and we watch, but from all these years of watching, this really seems like it's it. You know, time will tell. We'll see what happens, but I would be prepared to meet the Lord, because I think he's coming, you know, on this 3-day period that we're watching, the 24th through the 26th here. Everything in the heavens looks right. It's the right time of season. It's in the spring. It's very hard to believe that we would go another year. Everything that's happening, we're seeing inflation now. We have 4.2%, 6.6%. We see the rider on the black horse. You know, we see all the wars coming. We see the earthquakes. We see the weather here. The drought has been unbelievable here in Minnesota. I mean, it looks like the desert. 2 or 3 weeks ago, the grass was green at the airfield where I fly my RC airplanes, and now it looks like Arizona. I mean, it's just dirt and sand almost. The grass is just gone. So there's some really hard times coming on the earth. Pray for your friends and relatives that, you know, they only have a few days left, that the last of the sheep would be brought into the sheep pen before the Lord returns. Again, thank you all for watching. This is George from the Return of the King, and we'll all have a big old party up in heaven here, hopefully in the next few days. All right, thanks for watching.